Welcome, everyone. Hope you are ready for a slightly less technical talk than the last one. So I'm going to talk a bit about Moblyng experience over the last 3 years building HTML5 games for mobile. And so here's the obligatory intro for me. I'm the CEO of Moblyng. Before working at Moblyng, I spent 10 years working at Turbine, making a variety of massively multiplayer games as a programmer and then as an engineering director. And then I worked at Electronic Arts for several years working on Spore. So let's talk about Moblyngs history. We've been making games for the last 3 years. We've built 13 HTML5 games. We're down in Redwood City. We're a venture-backed company. And we were one of the 4 launch partners with HTML5's recent HTML5 game initiative. So what's the history of the products we've built? Well, first we started off and we built a poker game, some word games, and a variety of X-War style titles. Then that led to Deal with Playdom, where we developed the mobile versions of Sorority Life, Social City, and Mobsters. Now, an important point here is they actually had an internal team that developed their iPhone versions of those natively. We took and connected with their existing Facebook servers and built HTML clients for WebOS, Android, et cetera, et cetera. That then led to us doing a deal with WeWorld. They are a virtual avatar site. We created a game called Weenie Life with them that is live on Facebook and iPad now. And finally, that led to us working with Facebook for mobile social poker live as well as Word Racer Live. So a Boggle-style game and a poker game, Texas Hold'em. So let's get to the guts. What's happening in mobile with HTML5? This talk is a lot of the experiences we've had in developing for mobile, and a lot of it is, holy cow, that stuff doesn't work very well. And I'm going to walk you through some of the lessons we've learned over the course of the 3 years. Now, this talk is much less about specific tactics. I'm not going to tell you how to optimize your DOM renderer for Android 1.7. Instead, this is going to be much more about the strategy of developing games for mobile using HTML5. Now, quick show of hands, how many of you develop games are targeting mobile devices? All right, fantastic. So, I mean, the whole point of HTML5 is it's cross-platform, that you're bridging all of these disparate handsets, tablets, and desktop and laptop machines. And it makes it easy for your customers to play these games, because at the end of the day, as some of the previous speakers have mentioned, they don't care what language your game is programmed in. It could be an object-oriented Pascal for all they care. The thing that matters is that it's easy for them to play, because time is currency for them. And if it takes longer than 5 seconds to find and launch the game, you're done. And social games are a great fit for this technology stack, because mobile devices are proliferating. They're all over the place, more and more and more screens, and people want to be able to play these very light touch, light engagement games on those devices. So there's a big market opportunity here. And in 2009, we were looking around, we're saying, wow, there's not very much competition in the mobile space. There's lots of distribution opportunities, and we can capture some of the users who are already playing games on Facebook. So we can release games on Facebook and also have companion games that are on the mobile devices. This key strategic decision made a huge impact on our technology choice, and that's part of the reason why we went HTML5. Now, we build our games in HTML5, JavaScript, and CSS, and we also release native applications, which are wrappers around that HTML5. And the point was to go wide on devices. So not only do we support the big players, but remember, 2009, our products run on all of these various devices, because we don't care who wins. As long as somebody wins, then our products will be seen. So let's talk about the specific technology framework we used. We built for smartphones and web, JavaScript, CSS, DOM manipulation for the UI. We are not using Canvas. And the simple reason why is Canvas mode is not supported on the vast majority of devices out there, especially in 2009. Now, we also built a Moblyng shell, which is our equivalent to PhoneGap, because we wanted to be able to package up our web-based code into native apps that we could then distribute through the app stores. Now, one of the nice things about having your own native shell is it allows you to do things like access local storage, access the device sound, as well as access to the contacts on the phone. And that's important, especially if you're building a social game and you want to try to get people to invite their friends. So why write a native wrapper? So clearly, we can get into the app stores and make some distribution much easier. And here's a key point. As much as we would love to think, and we're all here because we love HTML5, we'd love to think people understand web apps, it's not true. I was talking to a VC last year. He didn't realize that you could bookmark web pages on your iOS device and have them on your home screen and launch them as if it was an app. This is a fellow who's invested tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in technology companies, and he didn't understand that you could bookmark those kind of applications. What does that say about your regular consumer? So, I'm probably saying, but Justin, that's not HTML5. You're writing native code. Yeah, you're right. But the problem is that on the vast majority of devices that are out there, especially older devices, there's no canvas and no local storage to speak of. And as, we're happy, as the standard gains traction, as devices get better and better, and the device manufacturers start incorporating various elements of the standard into their devices and into their native software, we're happy to retire portions of our code. But for us, it wasn't an option. We couldn't rely on them providing those kind of that level of functionality. So let's talk about market timing. Yeah, we wasn't quite so good because we were early. We were really early. The proliferation of smartphones and tablets had not yet really hit its peak. I mean, here's smartphone shipments in 2009, 180 million. It's projected to be 500 million by 2012. It's a huge number of devices. But perhaps more important, and more important for this conference, is this slide. The estimated number of shipping tablets and smartphones this year will be larger than desktop and laptops. Now think about that for a minute. That's just tablets and phones. That's not counting set-top boxes. It's not counting refrigerators. I was at Mobile World Congress in March this year in Barcelona. I saw a refrigerator with a touch screen and Wi-Fi connectivity. It was all about RFID sensors so you can detect whether your milk has gone bad and make suggestions on what you want to cook that night. But you could also play our games on it. There is a huge market opportunity for playing games on your refrigerator. These screens are going to be going everywhere, and that's the power of HTML5, and that's part of the reason why we are super excited about it, and we bet the company on this technology. But an important thing to remember, especially if you're developing for mobile, it's not necessarily the right choice all the time, and it's not the thing you want to use for all problems. Because if you are trying to make a 3D shooter where you want 60 frames a second and you're going to be using megabytes and megabytes of textures, you're probably not going to be going on mobile. And if you are, you probably are better off writing native code today. That may not be true in 6 months. That may not be true in a year. But right now, if you need super blazing fast performance, don't do HTML5. Now, the other thing is people say, well, HTML5 makes it so I can just write once and it runs on tablets and phones and desktops. No, you have to specifically design for those 3 different environments. And Darius, love you, worked with you before. The new game website looks like crap on an iPhone. HTML5, right? We're an HTML5 conference, but the website looks junky. And the reason why is you have to keep in mind all of these different devices when you're developing from the get-go. So let's get back to the explosions. Let's talk about some train wrecks we've hit and some issues you're going to face. The first one is you're going to be spending a lot of money on physical devices. This is one of many pods we have around the office, just full of devices. And oh man, we have spent tens of thousands of dollars on devices over the past few years. And you might be saying, but Justin, I can just use device anywhere. I can just use this third-party testing system, and it'll be fantastic. They've already got all the devices. Well, that's great. If you want to wait. If you want to wait for your third-party testers to tell you about a bug in their weekly bug updates. Or if you can finally get device anywhere up and running, and there's nothing that beats your developer sitting with a device in their hand and testing touch functionality. Nothing. So why are you going to be spending a ton of money? Well, first off, there's a certain segment of the population that always gets the newest phone. It's the iPhone 3, the iPhone 3GS, the iPhone 4, the iPhone 4S. And guess what? You need to make sure you run on that hardware on day one. And that means you're paying premium prices for that hardware. And now after you've bought all these brand new devices, they get dropped. Someone's kid spits on it. It falls into the wheel well in the car and gets crushed by the chair sliding backward. You're going to lose devices, and you're going to have to replace them. So you're spending money, spending money. Not only that, some of the devices are kind of junk. We've had devices fail within 6 months. Suddenly, oh, this one can only connect to 3G, but not Wi-Fi. This one Wi-Fi, but no 3G. This one no longer recognizes a SIM card. This one has to be plugged in because the battery is it will just hard reset every 5 minutes otherwise. So you're spending money to replace these failing devices. Then on top of that, you want to make sure you've got plenty of each device for all of your developers. Just having one Droid X or one 4GS in your office is not sufficient because you need them in developers' hands. Every time you force a developer to get up from their desk and walk over to a testing station, you've lost. Because the incentive is, I'm just going to sit and finish my code, and then I'll go test. You want rapid testing and iteration. And this leads to my next point, Android fragmentation. So you want to use the greatest and latest honeycomb features, 3.0 and above? Great, less than 5% of the market. If you want mass penetration for your game, you have to deal with the fact that there are lots of older phones out there with old OSs. And this is not going to change anytime soon. Now, a special little side note here, special delivery. One of the early Motorola devices didn't actually implement the Android specification properly. Hardware worked, software implementation did not work. So the device was released, and we already had games out, and suddenly this new fancy game, the new fancy device, no longer ran any of our games. We spent 3 days frantically working with Motorola. They got us a patch at about 3 a.m. They were fantastic. But you can get completely blindsided by the hardware manufacturers. And you have to be ready to respond to that at any moment. And it's not just that the manufacturers can sometimes blindside you. Consumers are not going to behave in the way you want them to. This is a chart of phone OSs. The top 4 bars, those are iOS devices. They are all updated. Up to about 95% of iOS devices are on the latest major revision of the OS. Some phones from 2009 and 2010, over 50% are 3 or more major versions behind what is available for that phone. A lot of your mobile users are not going to be hooking their computer to their phone and updating their phone OS. That's a scary prospect. And so you not only have to deal with Android fragmentation, you might on a single device have to have multiple versions of the OS and test against all of them. And so again, this is where you see your device costs just multiply. Android, again, yes, there is adoption, but it's slow. And on top of that, you've got devices that are huge variation in UI resolution. The Palm Pixie had a 320 by 400 screen. Just for perspective, the iPhone is 320 by 480. So you've lost 20% of your real estate on the Pixie. So you really need to design for 3 screens, phone, tablet, and desktop. And you need to prepare to be on the wheel of pain. You are going to spend about 8 times as much time on your UI iteration as you do on your actual game, because you have to run on all of these various devices. So that's painful, right? That's not making games. Let's talk about something that's fun. Making money. So at the end of the day, you do want to have people give you money for your app. And the vast majority of social games are free to play these days. So how do you get people to pay? It's all about reducing the friction for payment. And when you're walking down the street and you're playing a game and you are asked to enter your credit card information, 99 times out of 100, you're never going to get that sale. And so what we've done is we've actually taken the approach of we tried to integrate every single possible payment options under the sun. This is a small listing of the number we've integrated. And the reason why is regardless of how a customer has entered their credit card, you want to let them use that. Is it carrier billing? Is it PayPal? Is it Facebook credits? We don't care. And if you're building a mobile application, you need to minimum integrate at least these payment providers. And a side note about integration. So sometimes when you integrate, you get a lovely documentation package, beautifully illustrated sample applications with steps. If you've got someone on the phone you can call. And sometimes you get a box of crap. And you're expected to build your own tools to integrate the stuff into your system. Now, most integrations, most third-party providers are somewhere between these two extremes. But you need to treat every integration as if you're hiring that company. Look at their resume. What other games have launched with their system? 2, call their references. Call those companies. Ask them how it went. It's not as simple as their salespeople will tell you it takes 5 minutes, 3 lines of code. You'll be sipping Mai Tais by lunch. You're looking at a minimum 2-week integration for every single payment provider, minimum. And once you've actually completed all that work, you need to measure them. And the reason why is you're going to see surprising results. We have actually seen anywhere between 500 and 1,000x difference between payment providers that on the surface for a game look like they should be equivalent. So on top of that, you also want to get to discovery and distribution. How are you getting your app to people, and how are you advertising it? Again, it behooves you to go to as many of these places as possible. And again, this takes time. And this, you may hear a theme here. The actual development of your game is going to be a small portion of the development of your product. Because you might have a great game, but if people don't want to, if they can't find it, if they can't tell their friends about it, and they can't give you money, it's not going to be a successful title. Google has done a lot of fantastic stuff, and I'll just say once, the Google market, Android market is getting a lot better. It was not so good initially. A side note, when I started about 2 years ago, I was talking to some folks for the Android market, and I said, hey, so how are apps going to be ranked and in this brand new store? It's going to be awesome. And the engineer was telling me about how they were going to do an analysis on how long people played the apps and how many people searched for it and how many people recommended it. I said, great, so what happens when someone goes to one of the WoW gold farms in Southeast Asia and says, hey, everyone install this app and rate it at 5 stars with your actual Google identification? The engineer looked at me blankly. Hadn't crossed his mind. There is massive store manipulation that happens in mobile. Your best, and it's kind of like SEO when you're dealing with search results. The best option is to make a better game than your competitors, period. But if you have 2 apps, 2 games, just equally as good, same genre, equivalent gameplay, the one that's pulling more dirty tricks is probably going to be higher in the app ranking. And you have to make a call in terms of where your company wants to spend its money. Do you spend money on advertising? Do you spend it on direct store manipulation? Or do you spend it on additional development to make your game better? So don't think that it's all sunshine and light when it comes to store rankings. It's not. It's pretty brutal. So let's talk about some other painful lessons we've learned. Startup sounds, customers hate them. Most of the time when people are playing games on their phone, they're playing where they shouldn't be. In a meeting, on the train, at a lecture, in the public bathroom. So they don't want that startup sound. We implemented a whole startup sound sequence. We had a great identifying Moblyng sound. Killed. Device orientation does matter. The perception is you have your phone in portrait mode, I am reading email. You have your phone in landscape, I'm watching a movie or playing Angry Birds. If you want people to play your game, and we've seen numbers on this, during the workday, portrait is the way to go. I was trying to figure out a mullet joke here, but it just didn't work. So let's talk about it. So HTML5, we're all here. We're excited about HTML5. There are a lot of people out there who think HTML5 is still kids' play. It is not big time. It's come back when you're ready to play with the big boys. How do you get taken seriously by publishers and VCs if you don't have someone who's already receptive to HTML5? It's pretty easy. You need to have a hands-on demo because there are 2 primary objections that VCs and publishers always have. The first one is they just fundamentally don't believe it works. Oh, HTML5, I saw a demo, I saw some fish, yeah, it looked good. That's not a real game. If you can go in with a hands-on demo, even if it's just mocked up gameplay, that gets over that first hurdle. Yes, it works. And this is, again, where you need physical devices. Yes, it runs on this iPhone, this iPad, this Android phone, this Android tablet, this web browser, this web browser, this refrigerator. Show them that. It gets over that first hurdle. And then, once you do that, you have to get over the second hurdle, speed. This is the other perception of HTML5 that you will run into time and time again. It's too slow, especially on mobile devices. And there are 3 areas where you really need to pay attention to speed. First one, launching. If your app takes more than 10 seconds to launch, you're dead in the water. Just period. And it needs to launch in under 10 seconds on all of those devices. And again, I would actually encourage you to not let your developers have iPhones. Put them on other mobile devices, because this is fantastic. This is the gold standard. Everyone thinks this is the new shiny thing, right? All games, if it runs on this, it should run on all these other devices, right? Put them on other devices, because those are the ones that will sync you speed-wise. Touch speed. When I click a button, does it look like it got clicked? Touch sensitivity, because of some of the patents that these folks have on other devices, the touch screens are not so good. The first edition Droid, we had an issue where web-rendered buttons, the touch area for the button was off by 25%. And this was across the board for a lot of apps on the initial Droid, and they fixed it in subsequent releases. But, I mean, for a demo, if you have an investor who tries to click the Play Now button and can't, you're done. And the final thing about speed is you have to take into account scrolling, because on tablets and phones, your UI is going to be really cramped. You're going to need to have good scrolling speed. Any staccato on the scrolling, any stuttering, you're sunk. And then they'll say, and this is the great one, why aren't you just writing it native? And that's the kiss of death. You have to remove that objection before they can make it. So for your company, if you're trying to develop these games in HTML5, hopefully you're already doing tech tests for your programmers. You also need tech tests for your CSS and HTML folks. HTML and CSS for HTML5 on mobile devices is much more akin to programming than it is to design work. If your CSS and HTML folks are scared of IE 8 and 9 compatibility issues, they're going to run screaming for the hills when you have to show them WebOS and all the various Android flavors. We've actually lost several CSS and HTML designers over this very issue. And it's much better to test them up front, watch how they work, than hope that they're going to be able to make that leap. Another thing, mobile metrics suck. There are a lot of technical hurdles involved in this. Not only your data pipe is stuttery, you can actually lose your entire cache when you power cycle your iOS device. Plan to verify these. It's a pain, but you have to verify your mobile metrics. And really the best way is either roll your own for metrics verification or implement 2 metric systems. And this is because at the end of the day, if you're building a social app, and we've suffered through this, and your metrics aren't good, you have no idea what your users are doing. And so by having at least 2 metric systems implemented, yes, it's more expensive from a time span point, but you can actually verify what your users are doing. A little Christmas surprise we received in 2009. Palm released an update on December 26th, which changed the directory structure for images. Broke all of our games. Their entire dev team was on vacation until January 2nd. I want you to think about how many people play games during that week before January 1st. Yes. This is another reinforcing point to you have to be early and have great relationships with all of your hardware manufacturers and handset manufacturers, because they could pull stuff like this. And the sooner you look at their hardware and the sooner you look at their new software, the less likely you're able to get one of these surprises. There were several very unhappy families because their various members had to come in and work that week to try to solve the problem. We did solve the problem on the 28th, And the Palm folks showed up on the 2nd, and by 10:30 had released a fix. But that was not soon enough for us. So let's talk some nuts and bolts. Hopefully you're using source control and bug tracking. Make sure that your engineers and your designers are using the same development virtual machines or environments as everyone else. Automate your build and deployment process and ensure the developers use it. Now, you're saying, but it's HTML5, Justin. We don't need build plot process. Wrong. You're going to go through a minification process. You're going to want to combine your JavaScript files. You're going to want to combine your CSS files into single files because the number of files you load on a device can radically affect performance. And you want to remove any vagary or variability in your build and deployment process. And part of the reason you have your developers on the same virtual machines that are nearly identical for your production environments is that way they can go through the build and deployment process themselves. IE899, just have some old laptops around the office. This has been really fantastic for us. Developers go up, sit at the laptops, and you can compare pixel by pixel, side by side. If you have machines that you have to dual boot, if you have to have people uninstall and then reinstall, it's too much friction. So just have a bunch of laptops set up around the office. And the other thing is you really need to cross-train everyone. We saw a pretty significant improvement in our game's performance as soon as we started teaching our CSS folks JavaScript and teaching our JavaScript folks CSS. Mobile devices for everyone, and swap them around. Don't let one guy become the Windows Mobile fellow, and then another person be the Android 2.1 person, and people get really comfortable. It works on my machine. So swap and rotate those devices around. So we had a great partner with Playdom in integrating with their servers for their games. If you are building a front-end, HTML5 front-end game for someone's existing back-end server, if you don't have a good relationship, if you don't understand their APIs, if they don't share their product and product roadmap and development schedule, you're going to get sunk. Absolute positioning is the devil. If your CSS folks are using this, retrain them, and if they continue to use it, fire them. You're not going to be able to predict what screen resolutions are coming down the pike for mobile devices. Yes, there are a fair number of standards, but they're not consistent. And who knows how big that fridge's screen is going to be. So you have to use relative positioning. You have to use a liquid UI, which automatically scales to the size of the display. And in an attempt to try to piss off as many people as possible with one bullet point, avoid jQuery, WebGL, and Canvas. If you're using these things, they're great technologies, don't get me wrong. But each one of them is either slow or non-functional on a large number of mobile devices. If you are going for a specialized piece of hardware, fantastic. Program to the metal, write all sorts of crazy JavaScript tricks in order to take advantage of the hardware rendering on that device. If you are trying to hit a broad market of devices, you can't rely on any of these technologies right now. I hope that next year at this conference, I'll be able to put up a big sign that says, hey, I was wrong about that last point. We can now use Canvas. But again, I'm going to bring back that point about Android device fragmentation in terms of the OS and also orphaned OSs out there. That even next year, there's still going to be 2.1, 2.2 OSs, a lot of devices out there. And a good point here is that you'll say, oh, but it works on iOS. Well, I'm sure you all saw the slides recently by Mary Meeker that show that Android shipments have actually passed iOS shipments. So just writing for iOS devices is not really it's a strategic decision. And if you're trying to hit the most number of devices, especially outside the US, you need to support Android and all of the flavors of Android. So if there's anything you take away from this talk and sort of some of the slings and arrows we've suffered over the last 3 years, it's really about minimizing technical risk. That if you are building a game using HTML5, I highly encourage you to try to find the most stable pieces of technology to use around that HTML5. So if you're building a game using HTML5, a Node.js server, a MongoDB, and a 0MQ messaging, well, it's a great experiment, but I wouldn't want to necessarily bet my company on that because every one of those pieces is in motion. especially if you're trying to hit a broad number of devices. So yes, HTML5 is awesome. We think it's great, but we can only use in the mobile world the lowest common denominator. And if you are trying to push the envelope of what you want to do, use WebGL, get on desktops, etc., fantastic. You just need to be very careful with your messaging with consumers, because right now the message that consumers are getting is HTML5 runs everywhere, and that's fundamentally not true. So look at your technology stack and what kind of game you're trying to build, and make sure it's the right one. So that's the end of my talk. Thanks, and I'll see you on the other side of the line. And according to my magical countdown clock, I've got 14 minutes for questions, should you have. But I also know that lunch is happening after this. So I'm lucky that I didn't get the dreaded slot after lunch when everyone's in food coma. So yes?
Hi, Justin. Can you give a little bit of a perspective on company size of Moblyng and how that shaped your talk here? And then if you had fewer resources, fewer headcount, where would you prioritize?
So Moblyng has been around for 3 years. We're 35 employees now. And in terms of where we would prioritize if we were smaller, I think the big question is, well, by focus you mean like engineering versus assets, or are you talking about?
Yeah, designing the game itself, distribution.
Right. So what I'd say is the key to all this is the game. I mean, you can integrate all of these various payment mechanisms, you can integrate all of these social networks and app stores, but at the end of the day, if your game sucks, no one's going to care. So that has to be the priority. You have to make a good game. That being said, you are also, I would say that your team is probably going to be split, initially 2 to 1. 2 developers for the game, 1 developer on sort of integration with other systems. As you get closer and closer to your ship date, that ratio should flip. Because hopefully you can integrate with a broad variety of social networks, and your game only needs a few more resources to get over the ship line. Then, once you go live, it's probably going to be flipping again for a short period of time, because you're going to need to focus on the game, make improvements to it. It's games as a service. That's a whole talk into itself. You need to support what your user doing. You're probably going to have to respond to metrics. And yes, you'll need some supplemental engineering to support all these various distribution partners. But once you've gotten that work done, hopefully you don't have to touch it that often. So go over this side.
If it's not too proprietary, what have you guys discovered around the conversion rate and willingness of payment for different device types? Like there's been things, people saying iOS users will pay more than Android users will pay more than, et cetera.
So I would say that it is actually more tied to the game type than it is device. So on iOS devices, certain types of games monetize better than Android and other. There are other types of games that in Android we see 2 to 10x monetization rates to iOS. And in terms of which types of games, you're welcome to either come work for us or buy us.
Do you still, in 2011, do you still really target devices outside of Android and iOS? What are the percentages of your players? Which platform? How much?
Right. So the question is, how many devices do we target aside from Android and iOS? And the answer is that yes. The short answer is yes. We do target devices outside of Android and iOS. In terms of specific percentages, I can say that the lion's share are in iOS and Android. We are a venture-backed company, so we are looking to go big or go home. And part of that is the story of the company of Moblyng. Moblyng is about getting games to work on all of these various devices. And I joke about it, but that refrigerator is actually a validation of our business strategy, that how many games are going to be able to run on that refrigerator on day one. When, who knows, when Netflix decides to integrate a web browser in their set-top box or the Roku box, our games are going to be able to run in that. And that, from a distribution perspective, makes it very attractive for the company. So.
Yeah, focusing and getting a better understanding on your user acquisition when it comes to mobile, could you speak to the differences that you've had or your experience with utilizing like different ad networks, such as being focused on a CPC, CPI across iOS and Android? And what's the relative ARPU differences you could see? I know it might be based off the differences of the games itself, but in generalities, it would be great to hear.
So we have seen, so I'm not going to answer specific numbers, but what I can say is that we have actually seen radical differences in the same, whether it's a CPC or CPI program, based on the time of year. So if you are going to folks and they're saying, oh, we can give you this rate or that rate, this part of the reason we went so wide on the number of integration points is that we don't know on a month-to-month, quarter-to-quarter basis where the best spend is going to be for user acquisition. And for us, it's been basically a big meat grinder of integrate to 20 or so distribution partners, throw money in, churn it out, look at the numbers, and then double down on the ones that are succeeding. And I would say it's highly variable based on the product.
So, quick follow-up. So has your user acquisition been to be doing more burst campaigns, or is it to be standardized user acquisition for like 500 or 1,000 installs per day or whatever users per day?
We've experimented with both, and we find that actually a sustained campaign is great, but then you add bursts in when you're adding new chunks of content. So it's basically it's to invigorate your user base, but you do need a constant level of users coming in for both, depending on if it's a competitive title or a non-competitive title. But especially the competitive titles, you do need a new injection of blood every once in a while, if only so the experienced players have the sense of they can crush a bunch of noobs.
So given the breadth of platforms that you're looking to support, can you talk a bit about how that influences your development process? Do you factor in cross-platform from day one? Do you focus on a particular platform and then bake in cross-platform along the way? And also, if you could talk a bit about how you ended up there from where you started.
Yeah. So from day one, our goal was to be on a variety of platforms. And so it's day zero that we're thinking about cross-platform. And the evolution has been, initially we were just focused on phone, but it has evolved to be really the three platforms: phone, tablet, and desktop. And part of the reason there is on the phone, your input device can occupy 1/8 of the screen. On a tablet, your input device can occupy 1/16 if you've got a really big phone. And on a desktop, you've got a very precise mouse cursor. So part of our initial product plan is to mock up UIs for those three setups. And because our user flows and our game flows are actually somewhat different based on the product and the platform. And we do have folks who specialize on the design side in much more smartphone flow versus tablet flow versus desktop flow. But it really is, we look at everything from day one. And part of the reason there is that we don't know. It's very data-driven design and data-driven. We're responsive to how our users are using the apps. And so some titles have really taken off on tablets, and some games have taken off on tablets, and some games have taken off the phone form factor. But we don't necessarily, we have a sense of what's going to win, but we then try to hit everything for the big win.
Since you've been doing this for about 3 years, I wonder if you could speak to experiences of doing stuff in-house versus paying contractors or third parties to do, and what good experiences and bad experiences you've had, and what you've brought in-house versus what you export.
Outsourcing. Yeah. So I think a good rule of thumb is anything that you can throw away 90% of and still be okay is a great thing to outsource. Artwork is a fantastic one. If you say, hey, to outsource house, we need 100 swords. They can generate 100 swords, and you might get 10 that are good, and you can throw the rest away. So at that point, that's a fantastic way to do it. We found that actually the device programming itself, your JavaScript and your CSS, that really needs to be in-house. And in part of that is because the people need to have hands on the devices. And you need to be able to say, all right, here's our comparison app. Here's what kind of scroll speed it has. And look, it just feels a little janky on this device, but it works great on this other device and this other device. And most outsourcing houses don't have the breadth of hardware that we do, and also the depth of OS varieties. And that's really a key portion of having them be in-house. And also, I and Stuart, our founder, are a big believer in face-to-face communication, and outsourcing it adds a delay to that process. So, thanks.
What would you say to people who want a slightly better middle ground and aren't a huge fan of your jQuery, Canvas, and WebGL, or this has to run on all platforms attitude? I know there are a lot of people who are getting into this who say, I am just going to focus on these platforms, and I am going to use these technologies and phooey with this man. Do you have advice for people who are kind of bringing it up, and whether you think there is a possibility for things like that to be successful?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There is a huge market out there. I mean, you saw those numbers of smartphones, tablets, and desktop machines. There's a huge number of devices that are being shipped. This is not, and I'm in fact very happy about all of the products that are really successful, and more successful than our titles, because it proves out the space. In the same way that Half-Life 2 proved out Steam, in the same way that Halo proved out the Xbox, we need those bellwether titles, as our keynote speaker mentioned this morning. So I say bully for you. If you're going to go for those technology stacks, just do it and embrace it wholeheartedly. For us, we are trying to hit that wide spectrum of devices, and so we just can't use those. Now, that being said, today, if you were starting the company today, you might say, hey, guess what? We're going to ignore 50% of the Android devices out there. But that's okay because there are so many, there's X millions of Android devices out there. So it's okay that we lose 50%. And that's a viable business strategy. We are a 3-year-old company, so part of our strategy is dependent on also when we started the company. And, you know, it's great. You can kind of tell when a company was founded, what on their back end. Is it Java? Is it PHP? Is it Scala? Is it Node.js? And you can kind of time when the company was started. So,
can you talk a little bit about what role automated testing has played in your development process and whether that's changed much over the years?
Yeah. So initially, not at all. And then it has become a much more important part of our development process. The problem is, and this is the same problem that console game developers have had for years, is that you're trying to use the entire device. You're trying to use everything on the device, which doesn't leave a whole lot of space for automated test systems client side. So we actually do a lot of our automated testing on desktop machines. So we set up a Firefox instance or a Chrome instance, and then do automated tests against those clients. Automated tests are really important, especially when it comes to payments. I mean, you saw the number of third parties we're integrated with. It is just a huge checklist we have to go through for each build. And if you can automate that stuff, it's great. But I would say, frankly, it's less important than having a great game. That if you're building, you need to build the game first, then build your integration with all these various systems, and then think about automated testing. Because having automated testing but no integration with, say, Facebook credits or PayPal or Google Checkout, you're not making money. So once you've proved that you can actually make some money on the game, then invest in automated testing and bulk that system out. Had we spent a lot of time on automated testing initially, we would not be generating as much revenue to then prove out the business.
Thanks.
All right, so I think I've got a minute left, and it looks like no more questions. So thank you very much.